Okay, so moving forward to designing capacity development, maybe I should show you this video of the view from the window. Can I play this? So this is a little video I just made. So these are the mango trees from all 6 windows I have, and you can see a bunch of very nice mangoes. These are raw mangoes, and we call them kairis in the local language, Mavinakai in my language, Kannada, but these are very what do you call them, tangy, so you can cut them, put some salt and cayenne pepper and enjoy them. It's really a good season for mangoes. Okay, so that's the building that gives this strange light in the evening. Okay. So designing capacity development. After elaborating on defining capacity development and pointing out the current practices that require radical deconditioning, it's time to focus on designing capacity development. We talked about deconditioning already. However, designing capacity development is not a new challenge, but has baffled development professionals for more than half a century. In 1969, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, which is still very active, commissioned a study that found several common challenges, that is, vague planning, unclear responsibilities or line of command, and difficult evaluation. So you want to have monitoring and evaluation, but also you don't want it to be overwhelming in terms of allowing progress. It sparked the development of the logical framework approach, LFA, which has been adopted, adapted and altered in several steps by numerous organizations and spread all over the world. We discussed this already a little bit. These design frameworks have been called different names over the years, such as LFA or goal-oriented project planning, results-based management, and theory of change. Although there are noticeable differences between them, as the originators of each new framework tried to address perceived shortcomings in its predecessor, the common challenges identified in the USA study persisted, and they still persist. So it's not so this is a generic theory of change. So you have legends. F1 and F2 are possible feedback loops in the system, and you have arrows which are indicating causal effect assumptions. Of course, we have to evaluate assumptions, as we talked about already. Causal link assumptions, events and conditions needed for the causal link to be realized. So here is the timeline we are thinking about, and you have the generic theory of change, where you start on this end with supporting activities. So nested theories of change for supporting activities, so help bring about assumptions, including the enabling environment, which is what capacity development is all about. So here you have external influences coming in at some time and unintended effects catching up as well. So you have output activities, reach and reaction, immediate outcomes. So you have feedbacks between immediate outcomes and outputs and activities, and you have intermediate outcomes, again feeding back to intermediate outcomes before that, and you have impact, which you want to make sure is what you expect. But impact causal link assumptions exist, and intermediate outcome causal link assumptions exist. Intermediate outcome causal link assumptions exist, and reach and reaction causal link assumptions. So how all these things have to work together to actually get you the impact that you started with as a design parameter, let's say, or a goal, has to be dealt with in terms of all these feedbacks. And as we said, monitoring and evaluation along the way has to be done to make sure you're on the right track, but they shouldn't become overburdened and ignore on the ground learning and education and capacity that the internal partners are experiencing. And it has to be flexible. So lack of flexibility and lack of complete planning end to end, including accounting for feedbacks and evaluating causal link assumptions based upon the outcomes along the way, are all very critical. Okay, so this is what the complexity. These are the complexities in designing capacity development. But regardless of whether applying some logical framework or theory of change, the involved actors must be relentless in seeking a deeper understanding of how the human environment system works, what really constitutes the aspired capacity in that particular context, what the problems are, who should be involved to address them, etc., and not simply settling for what worked elsewhere or comes first to mind. So you have to be always keeping your eye on the bigger picture and not just look at what's right in front of you and what comes to mind. They must keep inquiring into these aspects and probing their interdependencies, which are these feedbacks and interdependencies. Not to belittle the vital importance of this process, but the involved actors must be like inquisitive children, never really settling for the answer and always following with the additional who, what, where, when, why, and how. For example, what else is needed, who must do that, and how are they dependent. Only armed with a deeper systemic understanding do they have a real chance of designing successful capacity development. Otherwise, it's simply dumb luck if the activities just happen to address what is needed. So that is shown here. There are lots of pieces, and missing one piece can ruin the entire puzzle that you are trying to put together. So one must track how things are fitting and why they are not fitting and what may be needed to make them fit to produce the bigger picture. So this is already something I went in the wrong direction, sorry. So the next step, a set of roles to consider, concern the roles of external partners whilst implementing the capacity development initiative being designed. Whilst there are many roles suggested, Hagelstein et al. Suggest 5 general roles that external partners can assume when engaging in capacity development, that is, expert, advisor, teacher, facilitator, and coach. So we talked about this a little bit, but it's okay to repeat. This varies in balance between implementing activities and supporting the growth of the internal partner. So this is what we mean. So experts start here. So external partners focus on implementation of activities will be quite dominant here, because external partners focus on internal partners' growth will still be in the learning process. So then they become advisors at some point as internal partners begin to grow. Then they become teachers, enablers, educators, capacity builders as such, and eventually they should become facilitators and just coaches who are advising from the sidelines, so that internal partners growth is now owned by the internal partners and they can then take it forward, so that the role of the external partners focused on implementation of activities is ending and they're just becoming now coaches who will hold hand and guide as necessary to play the game effectively in the sports metaphor, right? So at one end of the spectrum, the expert performs the task and solves the problem herself, and at the other, the coach lets the internal partner perform the task and solve the problem whilst observing, providing feedback, and discussing the pros and cons with different alternatives. Coach is just somebody who's going to highlight which way the outcome may go depending on how you play together, because internal partners themselves will have a lot of coordination they have to manage. In short, the expert focuses more or less exclusively on the implementation of activities, whilst the coach concentrates almost entirely on the internal partner's growth. Between these opposites, you find the advisor assisting the internal partner in solving a specific problem with the advisor's knowledge and experience, the teacher explaining basic principles and the skills required to conduct a general task and solve a problem, and the facilitator facilitating brainstorms, planning, and meeting. For each of these three intermediate roles, the focus on the implementation of activities decreases, as we saw, and the focus on internal partners' growth increases. So that's what we mean by these reducing size of the role of the external partners versus ownership by the internal partners. So we'll come back and look at mutual learning, which is another critical aspect for the internal ownership to grow to a full mature state, so that they can continue to take forward the capacity development and use it for sustainable development and resilience building to deal with the risks that are very location specific. There are lots of other components. Somebody has to keep providing early warnings, for example, for food, water, energy, health, transportation, buildings, and so on. So natural hazards, prediction systems, early warnings are pretty good everywhere. Either international forecast centers are providing it, or there are internal meteorological centers and so on which are able to do it. There are lots of last mile gaps that have to be filled even after you get the forecasts, which I discussed in a course called S2S, subseasonal to seasonal predictions and applications. But in this context, having the resilience and capacity building established, implemented, is that you are better able to take the early warnings and take actions to be prepared for disasters and impacts, to be prepared for mitigating the impacts, to be prepared for quick recovery, or be able to quickly recover and come back to the sustainability pathway, because each hazard multiplied with vulnerability and exposure is a risk that detours you from the sustainability path, and then resilience allows you to keep coming back. So capacity building, that capacity development, is basically give you that resilience that you own and hopefully maintain once the external partners have just become coaches, or they completely go away, depending on how well you owned up to the capacity. Okay, so we'll come back and continue in the next podcast.